Alright, so a few years back, I happened to come across this holster here. And I bought it at the time because it was kind of worn and dusty and beat up. And long before I made my first cosplay, which was a Batman costume years ago, uh, I wanted to do a gunslinger costume, as in Roland from the Dark Tower book series and the Marvel graphic novel series, which they also did a film version, which I have not seen yet, and we'll probably see it in the Dollar Theater here when it comes to that in a week or so, but I'm not going to pay full price. Sorry, it just doesn't look that good. One of the things about the movie I didn't like was a lot of the props were radically different from the book. I didn't mind the casting or any of that stuff, but the fact that guns didn't look the same bothered me. And I just wanted to do my own that was more based on the book series itself and which closely mirrored it, which was the comic series by Marvel. So I set out to make my own, and that's what this video is about today, guys. And I took a plastic toy pistol that was a pretty good mold. I mean, it already looked pretty realistic, but I wanted it to look more realistic. So, first of all, I chopped off the end of the barrel because this was just way too long. It was literally, as long as this box. So I cut off a couple inches. And that reason was twofold. One, to make it shorter so it's the actual length of a 45 like this. But the other one is because this sight is just not modern. Or I'm sorry, this sight is too modern. It's just not quite old-fashioned enough. So I did my own sight and put on the symbol of the Eld, and I covered all the screw holes and the sheriff star here, and I used a lot of bondo on this, a lot of body putty. And I don't like to do that because it's very toxic. I have to wear a respirator for the fumes while applying it, and I have to wear a respirator for particles while sanding it. But I just didn't know how else to make this look this good. So I also, as you can see, weathered and nicked up a little bit the handle, and I added the butt plates, which were put onto the butt of the gun whenever they passed from Roland Deschain onto his son Roland, the last gunslinger. And I felt like I remember the face of my father while making this, and hopefully you guys think so too. And hopefully this will give you some inspiration to do your own repaints, remakes, or whatever to anything. Alright, let's get to it. Alright, I got this from Dollar General. It was in the toy section. It was $6. It came with a Derringer and a little sheriff's badge that was part of a Tombstone sheriff set. And it makes noise. And the cylinder rotates and the hammer works, which I thought was pretty cool, although kind of dangerous for a kid's toy. I mean, at least it has an orange tip. And I'm not so much making this for cosplay as I am as a display piece. Although I may do a gunslinger cosplay, I don't know. But one of the first things I did was I took a very small Phillips head screwdriver and made sure all the screws are really tight. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a hacksaw. I'm going to cut off the end of this barrel. And I'm doing this for two reasons. One, this has a really, really modern looking sight on it, and isn't something that would be on the gunslinger's pistol, I don't feel. So first thing is, I'm going to saw this off. The other thing is, the barrel's just way too long. Okay. Alright, so now that I've got the end sawed off, the next thing I'm going to do is start sanding this. And the first thing I'm going to focus on is some of this writing here. I already started to sand it, as you can see, a little bit. And I'm starting off with a really, really rough 75 grit, and then going to a 150 to a 300 down to a 600 grit sandpaper. So it'll be nice and smooth, hopefully, and nice and evened out whenever I'm done with it. There's also a little bit of writing up here. It's a serial number. I don't think the gunsmiths of Gilead would have put serial numbers on the gunslingers' revolvers. So that's going to come off too. Alright, with about a half hour's worth of work, I ended up getting this all sanded down. And I used the 600 grits on all the areas of the barrel. And I only use the rough grit on the grips because I wanted to give it more of a rough wood grain look, and it doesn't have any sort of wood grain detail at all. So I thought that, the rough sandpaper would help add that in if I put it just on the brown areas. All this is going to get repainted, so it kind of doesn't matter ultimately, but I figure since I'm using the airbrush, those grainy marks from the sandpaper should stay in there and help it look more like wood. But everywhere else where I took off the writing and everything, I went from the rough grit, like I said, and worked my way down to the 600 to get it nice and smooth so you can't really tell there was all that crap there. The next issue I need to take care of is all of these screw holes. Obviously, there's not going to be a screw going through the barrel of a gun because you wouldn't be able to fire it. So I need to fill all of these excess little holes all up and down it. The only one, of course, I'm not going to fill is the one for the battery pack. And to fill all these holes, I'm going to use a hot glue gun, but I'm not going to fill them all the way up. Right, as you can see here, I filled it up pretty close to the top, but not quite all the way. I'm going to go through with some sandpaper and take off any little bit I may have got on here. But yeah, the reason why I didn't fill them all the way up with hot glue is it's really hard to sand hot glue. It doesn't want to do it. That was just a little filler to save myself some money on silicone and or bondo. I plan on doing all of these with silicone, honestly. And the reason for that is the bondo has some very hazardous stuff in it. And I don't like using it. It's really hard to be safe about it. I mean, it's not. You wear a respirator, do this and that, but then, I just feel like the particles stay out in my garage or wherever I end up sanding this, and it's just kind of a pain. So I'm going to use silicone. The other thing with bondo is it's kind of brittle. And if I would drop this, that bondo could crack and fall right out of the hole. So I'm just going to go ahead and use some DAP latex and silicone acrylic. It's this stuff here. I always take and squeeze it out of the tube, and what I end up doing is just applying it with my finger or a little applicator tool. Okay, I've already gone ahead and filled a few of these holes with the silicone that I use here. Like I say, you could use bondo, body putty, whatever you want to call it, but it's really, really caustic. I try to avoid that. I'd use it on a stormtrooper helmet, and I haven't used it much since then. And I've already filled all these holes, and it took about 3 to 4 applications per hole. And part of the reason, there's 2 reasons for this. One, gravity. I did, like I say, fill this up with some hot glue as much as possible, but gravity's still going to pull it down in and force any air out. And the other thing is, this stuff's water-based. It's acrylic, so as the water evaporates and it dries, it has a sense, or it has a tendency to just kind of concave in. And I've gone through this before in other videos, and I think more than enough people have explained it, but I'm going to go ahead and show you anyways. Like I say, I've already done these, but I left all these holes untouched. And like I say, I take this stuff and I squirt all the silicone into a tub, so I just have it ready, and I apply it with my finger. I probably should wear gloves when you do this. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. That's just how I roll. Okay, so silicone, try to massage and press and work it down into that hole as much as possible. Like I say, it's going to sink in anyways. Notice there I just kind of clean off all the excess. After that, I have some paper towels here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to wipe the excess silicone off of my fingers. And after my fingers are nice and clean, I have a separate little Tupperware here with some water. And I just get my finger wet, flick off some of the excess, then I just smooth this out with my moistened finger. Since it's acrylic, you can just use water. And this doesn't have to be 100% smooth or even or straight, because I am going to go back through and sand all this. And that's pretty much it. I'm going to go ahead and repeat that application on these other holes. And like I say, after you do it the first time, it's probably going to sink down, and you're probably going to have to do it at least once or twice more. And I would also say, and this is part of the hard part of doing any of this stuff, is wait at least 24 hours from your last application of silicone just to make sure it's not going to sink anymore, and just to make sure it's 100% dry. If you sand this stuff and it's a little bit wet, there's a chance it could tear it all right out, or make a huge dent or a big mess that you got to go back and fix later. Alright, so I took and I sanded down the silicone. And silicone doesn't stick the greatest to plastic. It sticks pretty good to the hot glue, and it sticks just fine to the EVA foam because it gets absorbed into it. But I did have trouble areas here and in this large hole here, and I had to use the bondo for that, unfortunately. But it did a great job of sealing it up and evening it out overall. And to sand this, sorry I didn't film any of the sanding, but it seems kind of redundant on such a simple, in a sense, simple step build, or modification, I'd say, not build. I just used a 300 grit sanding block for all the initial stuff. I'm still not quite done, but I've been using some very fine 600 grit just to get the rest of this out and evened up. And once I'm done with the sanding on all these holes that I filled, I'm going to go next and make the actual sight for the end of the gun here. And for that, I'm probably just going to use some EVA foam. Alright, I cut out the front sight, and I based this shape and the look off of drawings from the Marvel Comics, the graphic novel series, or single issues, or whatever you want to look at it. And to make that, I used a piece of 5mm foam. This is what's left of it. I heated it considerably on both sides. And just to show you the difference in thickness here, the top piece, as you can see, is somewhat thicker than the bottom. Whenever you heat the foam a lot, it does get much stiffer. And it also helps to seal up some of the porousness of it, so that it doesn't absorb as much sealer or paint. And I'm going to use some super glue here to glue on this front sight piece. Hashtag very meticulously. And also some of these seams that, even though this whole thing's screwed together, it's kind of flimsy, especially this trigger guard. So I'm just going to help firm all this up and glue everything together the rest of the way. Alright, I have my front sight glued on. I also went and cut out some pieces of EVA foam because this trigger just looked super chintzy and plastic. And just on the outside edge, I'm going to go through and fill that in a little bit to make sure it's nice and even and sand it, just like I do with everything else. Alright, here over the foam, I put some, this will show up, I put some acrylic, latex and silicone on there, the same stuff I was using earlier, and then once that was set, I sanded it and put some bondo over it just to help smooth it out a little bit more. Did that on both sides. And now this one is pretty much prepped for the most part. The couple things left that I have to do, one is I need to cover both of these. They look really tacky. I don't care what color I paint them, they're going to look tacky. And I also need, on the end of the gun here, I need to put the symbol of the Eld on both sides of it. So for the symbol of the Eld, I simply Googled it, and then just used a ballpoint Bic pen to draw it out. I mean, I could have just printed it out, but I'm not a big fan of printing it out. But either way, whether you print it out to size or you draw it, the main piece of advice I can give for making patterns this small, which is kind of a pain in the butt, cover both sides of the paper with some shipping tape or some scotch tape, or you can even cover the top with the clear tape so you can still see it, so that you can make your cuts with your X-Acto knife. You can cover the back with duct tape. This will make a nice sturdy pattern. It is harder though to cut through the duct tape with the X-Acto knife, but yeah, it's kind of impossible to use scissors. So when you're doing patterns this small, tape it, cut it. Alright, now that I got them cut out, I'm going to glue them on with some super glue to the end of the barrel. Alright, I haven't sanded it yet, but I've already started to put the bondo in on one side. And that is, of course, to cover up this god-awful looking silver star. And I'm not actually using the two-part bondo, I'm just using the glazing and spot putty. It's good for just small stuff. Just make sure you put the cap on tight and always wear a respirator whenever you use this stuff. And to spread it out, I just got this little tool here at the hardware store. Alright, I'm happy with the sanding and everything. So next, I use this rather small Phillips head screwdriver. And I'm going to take out this battery pack here, because there is a slight slot there. I don't know if that's supposed to be a vent or what exactly, but I don't want paint or anything getting in here. So I just got a little scrap piece of saran wrap here, and I'm going to go ahead and shove that in there. and then put the top back on. Alright, now that I got this masked and covered, I'm going to take a brush, and here I have some Mod Podge, and I'm going to use that to seal up any of these EVA foam pieces that I put on, because if I don't, it's going to absorb the paint, and it's probably not going to look quite right or match up with anything else. And it'll help seal up that foam so that it looks more solid and less porous. Alright, one of the last things I have to do before painting is on this handle here, where the wood grips are going to be, I've been putting, well, you can see it, but I've been putting little scratches on it there, and a couple little scratches there, and I'm going to put some other ones in the butt, and just kind of wherever. Whenever I looked at the movie props, it was heavily damaged, the grips were. I was looking at it because they were auctioning off all the props, including the gunslinger's guns, and I just really hated the way it looked. In the books, they were described as being worn and old and a little scratched up, but the particular wood it was made from was a type of sandalwood that was basically not from this plane of existence, was extremely strong and resilient, and it had been around for centuries, but still maintained its fragrance. It was almost like supernatural. Like the gunslinger's guns in the books and the comic had this almost supernatural element to them as well. And I always thought that was really cool, although very subtle, because from the outward appearance, they just look like guns. Okay, so there was my nerd fanboy rant on the gunslinger's guns. But yeah, I'm going to do that to both sides, and then I'm going to start painting, and to paint this, I'm going to use my airbrush. Alright, what I have here is some opaque black. However, I added some 40-30 mix additive, which is just a water-based polyurethane. What this does is, if you don't know, it helps the paint to adhere to plastic and different metals much better. And into that, I added some acrylic blue. I want it to have kind of a blued steel look, and I may have to adjust this a little more black, a little less blue. I don't know. I've been testing it out, but I haven't painted the gun yet. But as they're described, which is once again vastly different from the recent movie's prop, you know, the guns were described as being an ancient blued steel that was once again otherworldly. And I really want to try to capture the look of a blued firearm. I already did this once with the Dread MK2 from the 2012's Carl Urban Dread. I'm going to try to do it again here with this. Alright, I took some moccasin brown and got it to just the color that I wanted, and went ahead and painted the handle. Now that that's done, I want to help bring out some of the grain that I scratched into this with the rough grit sandpaper, as well as some of the nicks and cuts. And to do that, I have this black acrylic wash, and I made this myself. I just thinned out some black paint with water. There's not really much special to that. And I'm going to go ahead and somewhat liberally just apply this on everywhere. Make sure I get enough that it gets down in all the nooks and crannies and whatnot. little careful around the battery compartment. If you don't have one of those, you don't necessarily need to worry about it. Okay. And from here, all I'm going to do is I have some wadded up napkins. I'm just going to blot this back off. Any areas that I want to be a little bit more clean, I can do a little rubbing just to get that out. And you can repeat this as necessary, but you can see here that it's already helped to bring out some of that grain and scratches and really make it look much more realistic. So yeah, I may do this once or twice more just to help bring it out. Alright, now that my painting, marring, and weathering, at least the basic stuff, is done, both on the piece itself and the handle, there's another little finishing piece I need to put on, and I've been waiting until I had all this stuff painted because I didn't want any of the overspray to get on it. And what that is whenever these guns passed from Roland's father to Roland, Roland was a taller and heavier person. And the guns are meant to be balanced to the person's height and weight. So whenever they passed from his father Stephen to him, he had, well, he didn't have, the gunsmiths of Gilead added some plates to the butts of the gun here on the bottom. And there are a couple of, I'm not sure what material. Anytime I've seen pictures of it, I'm pretty sure it looks like it's gold or brass. I'm going to end up painting it with some gold craft paint. But I just took a 2mm piece of black EVA foam, and I'm going to glue this on to the bottom here. And then I'm going to paint it gold. But first, I'm going to make a couple little pieces that look like screws that I'm going to glue on this, and then I'm going to attach this to it and paint the whole thing. Alright, I got the plate glued on here, and for the screws, I just took a dead Bic pen and heated up the tip a little bit and just drew the screw shape into it. I didn't heat the foam at all, and I am not going to seal it with any Mod Podge or anything like that. I have zero intentions of doing that. And what I'm going to do next is, here I have some pure gold metallic paint from Folk Art, and a small brush. It's not even a really nice brush. But I'm going to take and just start applying the gold to it without sealing the foam. This will give it a kind of naturally dark, weathered look, and it's also not going to look super smooth. It's going to look pocked and old and kind of beat up, and I'm just going to go ahead and brush that all over. Okay, got that all painted up. It's almost dry. And a few other detail things I'm going to do is, like, I'm going to paint this screw here black. And these screws at either end I'm actually going to paint silver. And the reason for the contrast and difference is I'm going to figure that this screw is going to be made from the same bluish steel, bluish otherworldly steel as the actual main frame of the gun, whereas these, being added on later, are just going to be your garden variety silver steel screws. Alright, now this basic stuff is all painted up. The next thing I really want to do to this is give it a little bit more shine, but not too much. So I'm just going to spray it real quick with some Valspar high gloss lacquer. Too much of this is going to make it look too new, considering the scratches are too cheesy. But just a couple little shots on each side on the edge will help give it a little bit of glow and make it look a little bit more like polished and oiled and well cared for wood. Alright, overall I'm pretty well pleased up to this point. I really like the color that I got by mixing the blue and the black with a splash of white and some of the 4030 polyurethane stabilizer, and covered the holes pretty good. You can see them a little bit when the light hits it, but you know, bondo and things like that are really, really tricky to work with. So hats off to any of you car guys that make cars look perfect using this stuff, because man, it is not easy. It's a lot of layering and relayering and sanding and stuff that I didn't film because it would just drag this video on forever. So one of the last things I'm going to do, you can see here, like this, you know, like I said before, this is a very realistic looking mold. Like they did a really good job. Maybe not so much for the quality of the plastic because that's pretty flimsy, but you know, just the detail like this spring here. Of course, the spring's fake. It's just molded in, but to help bring this out, I'm going to use a Tester's silver paint marker and just very lightly run it along the edge of the spring here. Alright, I got the edges of the spring there without, surprisingly enough, getting the paint all over any of the black parts here and here. Pretty stoked on that. And I really think like that brings out some nice pop in it. And also, I don't think the spring would be made out of the same material as the barrels or the screws or anything, just because that's a piece that would be replaced probably constantly by a smith, gunsmith, blacksmith, whatever. So yeah, hopefully this video was informative. You guys learned something or gave you some new ideas on how to convert your own toy pistol, or on just how to do different wood effects and scratches and things like that with texture and contrast. And as always, thank you for watching. And if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe for more future videos like this. Thank you.